My life had always been defined by careful planning. I wasn't the kind of girl who left things to chance. I knew where I was going and how I was going to get there. Every dollar I saved, every late-night study session, every part-time job I took, all of it was leading me to one thing: medical school. Growing up, it had just been me and my mom, Helen. My dad had passed away when I was 10, and while I missed him every day, his foresight in setting up a college fund for me had been a source of comfort and security. At least, I thought it was. When my mom remarried 2 years ago, everything changed. Robert, her new husband, was the complete opposite of my dad: loud, flashy, and obsessed with appearances. He was the kind of man who drove luxury cars he couldn't quite afford and insisted on fine dining while his credit cards were maxed out. Despite my initial reservations, I tried to get along with him for my mom's sake, but it was hard when every conversation revolved around his money, his business, and, of course, his daughter, Sophia. Sophia was a year younger than me, and, to put it kindly, a complete nightmare. She was spoiled, entitled, and floated through life without a care in the world. While I had spent my teenage years juggling work and school, Sophia was busy curating her social media presence and hopping from one failed hobby to the next. She didn't have to work because Robert made sure she had everything handed to her on a silver platter. I, on the other hand, knew the value of hard work. My grades were impeccable, and I was already accepted into a top-tier medical program. The future I had dreamed of was within reach, or so I thought. Living under the same roof as Robert and Sophia had been challenging, to say the least. My mom, once fiercely independent, seemed to morph into someone else after marrying Robert. She laughed at his jokes, followed his lead, and constantly insisted that we all had to think like a family now, which, in her words, usually meant putting Robert and Sophia first. I'd overheard countless conversations where my achievements were downplayed while Sophia's mediocrity was celebrated as if it were a grand success. "Olivia, honey," my mom would say, her voice laced with that infuriating tone she used when she was about to justify something ridiculous. "Sophia just needs a little more help right now. She's finding herself." Finding herself, my ass. I tried not to let it bother me too much. I had my future mapped out, and all I had to do was stay focused. But deep down, I couldn't shake the growing unease that came with living in that house. Robert was always talking about investments and reallocating funds, phrases that made my stomach turn when I heard them spoken near my mom. And my mom, she had become so absorbed in this new life, so desperate to please him, that I started feeling like an afterthought in my own home. But still, I reassured myself, at least my college fund was untouchable. It was in my name, secured years ago by my dad, and no one could take that away from me, right? One evening, as I sat at the dining table filling out scholarship applications just to ease my nerves, Robert walked in with his usual smug expression. "Why are you stressing over all that?" he asked, pouring himself a glass of wine. "You've got your little nest egg, don't you?" "Yes," I replied cautiously. "It's for medical school." He chuckled, swirling the wine in his glass. "Good thing your mom and I know how to manage money. Kids these days don't understand financial responsibility." I froze. Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I glanced at my mom, hoping for reassurance, but she just gave me a tight-lipped smile and looked away. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing little things, strange conversations that ended when I walked into the room. Sophia getting expensive new gadgets and trips that didn't quite add up with Robert's supposed tight budget, and my mom avoiding eye contact when I brought up my upcoming tuition deadlines. A sinking feeling took root in my stomach. Something wasn't right, and deep down, I knew my carefully laid plans were on the verge of collapsing. I still remember the exact moment everything fell apart. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I had finally received an email from the financial office of my future university. Expecting a simple confirmation of my tuition payment schedule, I opened it without a second thought. Dear Olivia, we regret to inform you that the tuition payment expected from your college fund account has not been received. Please contact your financial institution to resolve this issue immediately, as your enrollment status is currently at risk. I stared at the screen, the words blurring together as a wave of nausea rolled over me. There had to be a mistake. My college fund was secure. It had been sitting untouched for years, growing with each interest cycle. Dad had made sure of that. Panic clawed at my chest as I quickly logged into my account, my fingers trembling over the keyboard. The balance, my vision tunneled. I blinked, refreshed the page, then did it again. But the number didn't change. Everything I had worked for, everything my dad had left for me, gone. I bolted down the stairs, heart pounding, and found my mom sitting in the living room, flipping through a fashion magazine like it was any other day. "Mom!" My voice cracked, and she barely glanced up. "Where's my college fund?" She sighed, setting the magazine down with an exasperated look. "Olivia, you're being dramatic." "Dramatic?" I nearly screamed. "My account is empty. Where did the money go?" She avoided my gaze, adjusting the throw pillow beside her like it was the most important thing in the world. "Well, we needed it for something else," she said finally, her voice unnervingly casual. I felt my knees weaken. "What do you mean, something else?" My voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. Robert strolled into the room then, swirling his ever-present glass of whiskey. "Sophia's tuition, of course," he said with a smug grin. "She needed it more than you did." The world tilted. My mouth fell open, but no sound came out. I turned back to my mom, desperate for some kind of denial, some explanation that would make this nightmare go away. But she just sat there, her lips pressed into a thin line, as if I should be grateful. "Sophia?" My voice broke. "You gave my money to Sophia?" Mom finally looked at me, her face softening in that infuriating, condescending way. "Sweetheart, she's struggling. She needed the money to transfer to a better school, somewhere she can really thrive. You're smart, Olivia. You'll find another way." I couldn't breathe. My stomach clenched painfully. "But it was mine, Mom. Dad left it for me," Robert scoffed. "Come on, Olivia. It's not like you won't figure something out. You've always been resourceful." I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to cry in front of them. Instead, a cold, simmering rage started to build inside me. They had taken everything from me. Years of planning, saving, sacrificing, wiped away with a dismissive wave of their hands. "You stole from me," I said, my voice like steel. Mom flinched, but Robert only laughed. "Don't be so melodramatic. We're family. And Sophia deserves a chance too, doesn't she?" Family. The word felt like a cruel joke. I turned on my heel and stormed upstairs, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Tears streamed down my face, but beneath the heartbreak, a new thought took root. They thought they could get away with this, but they had no idea who they were messing with. In the days that followed, I felt like I was moving through a fog, my mind racing while my body went through the motions. I still got up in the morning, still went to work, still smiled at my customers at the bookstore, but inside, I was screaming. The betrayal cut deep, deeper than I thought possible. My mother, the woman I had trusted more than anyone, had stolen my future and handed it to Sophia like it was nothing more than a piece of unwanted furniture. I avoided them as much as possible, shutting myself in my room whenever I was home. But avoidance wasn't enough. I needed to do something. The problem was I had no idea where to start. I reached out to the bank first, hoping against hope that there had been some sort of clerical error. Maybe the money was just misplaced. But after a long and painful conversation with a very sympathetic customer service rep, the answer was clear. The funds had been legally transferred. And the only authorized name on the account besides mine? My mother's. "She had full access," the rep said apologetically. "I'm so sorry, Miss Daniels, but there's nothing we can do." I hung up and sank onto my bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to push down the surge of helplessness threatening to overwhelm me. It wasn't until I overheard Mom on the phone later that evening that things started to fall into place. "Yes, Robert, I know how it looks," she was saying in hushed tones, "but you don't have to worry. Olivia won't do anything. She's always been the sensible one. She'll figure something out." I clenched my fists, bile rising in my throat. They thought I'd just roll over and accept it, that I'd take another part-time job, scramble for loans, and watch Sophia glide through life with my future in her hands. They had no idea. I decided I'd fight back. The first thing I did was start digging. I knew my mom's work had always been important to her. She prided herself on being the glue of her high-profile nonprofit organization, where she managed donor accounts and financial records. She loved to flaunt how much trust her boss, Mr. Holloway, placed in her. And that got me thinking, if my mom could steal from me, what else had she been up to? Late one night, while she and Robert were out at one of their ridiculous social gatherings, I snuck into the study. My mom's laptop sat open on the desk, the screensaver glowing softly in the dim light. Taking a deep breath, I sat down and started going through her files. It didn't take long to find something. Folders labeled expense adjustments and discretionary allocations jumped out at me. Clicking through them, my heart pounded faster with each document I opened. There were receipts for luxury spa visits, high-end boutiques, and expensive weekend getaways, all listed under vague expense categories like client relations and employee wellness initiatives. But I knew better. This wasn't company money going toward business expenses, it was personal. Screenshots, PDFs, emails. I copied everything onto a flash drive, my hands trembling. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the screen. My mom was siphoning money from the nonprofit to fund her lavish new lifestyle with Robert. And if Mr. Holloway found out, it wouldn't just mean embarrassment for her, it would mean termination, possibly even legal trouble. I had leverage now, but I had to be careful. The next morning, I casually asked Mom how work was going over breakfast. She barely looked up from her phone. "Busy, as usual. Mr. Holloway relies on me for everything," she said, her voice smug. I smiled sweetly. "Wow, that's a lot of responsibility, huh? Especially with managing all those donor accounts." Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "Why are you asking?" I shrugged. "Just curious. You're always working so hard." She studied me for a moment before nodding and going back to scrolling through her phone. But I could see the flicker of unease in her eyes. I knew I couldn't confront her just yet. I needed a solid plan, something that would make her regret what she had done, and more importantly, make her fix it. I waited a week, carefully watching, observing. I noticed how she acted around Robert, always deferential, always eager to please. He had her wrapped around his finger, and she was too blind to see it. One evening, as they sat in the living room discussing Sophia's bright future, I casually walked in and said, "Hey, Mom, have you talked to Mr. Holloway about those adjustments you've been making?" Her face drained of color instantly. Robert looked up from his glass of scotch, frowning. "What adjustments?" Mom forced a laugh. "Oh, Olivia's just being dramatic again." I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "Am I?" I tilted my head, letting my words hang in the air just long enough to see her squirm. "Because I was looking through some files on your laptop the other day and—" "Enough!" she snapped, standing abruptly. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you are not to go through my things." Robert sat forward, eyes narrowing. "What's going on, Helen?" I smiled innocently. "Nothing, Robert. Just some irregularities in financial reports. I'm sure it's all just a misunderstanding." My mom shot daggers at me with her eyes, but I could see the panic setting in. Robert, ever the opportunist, pressed harder. "Helen, what's she talking about?" I turned and left the room, hearing their muffled argument escalate behind me. I knew I had her now. She was afraid, and fear made people sloppy. Over the next few days, I made it clear that I wasn't backing down. I dropped subtle hints about donor records at dinner, left printed copies of her financial transactions in places she'd find them, and even mentioned casually in front of Robert how nonprofits faced serious legal repercussions for mismanagement. She tried to act like it didn't bother her, but the cracks were showing. And when I finally dropped the hammer threatening to send everything to Mr. Holloway unless she replaced my stolen college fund, she crumbled. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. The night everything came crashing down started off deceptively normal. Mom and Robert were hosting one of their lavish dinner parties, the kind where they pretended to be the perfect power couple, effortlessly charming their wealthy friends and business associates. The house was spotless. Catered food lined the buffet table, and Sophia, in her designer dress, flitted around like the princess she thought she was. I hovered in the background, invisible as always, nursing a glass of water while listening to the same empty conversations I'd heard 1,000 times before. But tonight was different. Tonight, I had a plan. Mr. Holloway, my mom's boss, had been invited, something I had counted on. He was a sharp man, always polite but distant, with an air of someone who didn't have time for nonsense. I watched as my mom greeted him with an overly enthusiastic smile, leading him to the bar while Robert sang praises about how much Helen had done for the company. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and walked over. "Mr. Holloway," I said sweetly, my voice carrying just enough to make sure the people around us could hear. "I hope you've been enjoying the evening." He nodded politely. "It's been lovely, Olivia. Your mother and Robert certainly know how to host." I smiled, pretending to be shy. "Well, they do have a lot of experience managing finances." Mom's eyes darted to me, her grip on her wine glass tightening. "Olivia, maybe you should check on the food." Ignoring her, I held my ground. "Actually, Mr. Holloway, I've been meaning to ask you something. How do you handle unauthorized financial reallocations at your company? I imagine it must be tough, keeping track of everything." There it was, the shift in the atmosphere. Conversation slowed, Robert's eyes narrowed, and my mother's face paled, though she quickly covered it with a forced laugh. "Olivia," she said through clenched teeth, "why don't we talk about this later?" I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Oh, I just thought it was relevant now. I mean, with all those employee wellness expenses." I let the words linger. You know, the ones covering spa trips and designer shopping sprees? Mr. Holloway straightened, his sharp gaze cutting to my mother. "What is she talking about, Helen?" Mom stammered, her carefully built persona beginning to crumble. I don't know what she's trying to imply. It's ridiculous." She shot me a desperate glare, but I was far from done. With a calm, steady hand, I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the email I had prepared. "Actually, I have something that might clarify." I handed my phone to Mr. Holloway. "These are expense reports from the last year. I was able to pull them from Mom's laptop. You might want to check out the discrepancies." Robert snatched the phone from Mr. Holloway's hands, his face turning red. "This is absurd," he barked. "Olivia, you have no idea what you're talking about." I folded my arms, leveling him with a glare. "Oh, I think I do. Like how my college fund disappeared without a trace to conveniently cover Sophia's new tuition." Sophia gasped dramatically. "I didn't ask for it. Dad said it was the right thing to do." Mom's facade shattered completely. "Robert, do something," she hissed under her breath, but it was too late. Mr. Holloway, now flipping through the documents, looked furious. "Helen," he said, his voice dangerously low, "I trusted you with these accounts. This is outright fraud." The entire room fell silent, all eyes on my mother as she stuttered out excuses. I was going to fix it. It was just temporary." Mr. Holloway's lips pressed into a thin line. "I think we need to have a conversation first thing Monday morning, and you should probably consider getting legal representation." Robert rounded on my mother, his voice a furious whisper that wasn't quite low enough. "You told me it was under control. Do you have any idea what you've done? We could lose everything." I watched with a grim satisfaction as realization dawned on both of them. They weren't untouchable anymore, but I wasn't finished yet. You know, Mom, I said softly, savoring every second of her unraveling composure. All you had to do was tell me the truth, but instead, you chose to lie and steal from me. I turned to Mr. Holloway, meeting his gaze with confidence. If you need further evidence, I have more copies. I just thought you should know before things got worse. Mr. Holloway gave me a curt nod. Thank you, Olivia. I'll be in touch. With that, he turned and left, and the rest of the partygoers followed, whispering and stealing glances at my mother as they hurried out. Sophia, sensing the storm that was about to hit, slipped upstairs without another word. As the last guest left, my mom collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. How could you do this to me? She whispered. I felt a pang in my chest, but I shoved it down. How could you do this to me, Mom? My voice was quieter now, but the anger still simmered. You stole my future and handed it to someone who didn't even appreciate it. Robert, still fuming, paced the room, muttering about damage control and calling their lawyer. But I didn't care. I had won, and I didn't feel the least bit guilty. The aftermath of that night was everything I had hoped for and more. My mother's carefully constructed world crumbled faster than even I expected. By the time Monday morning rolled around, the damage was irreversible. Mr. Holloway wasted no time. He conducted a full audit, and within a week, my mom was not only fired but also facing a potential lawsuit. The board of the nonprofit was furious. Donors pulled their funding, and the organization's reputation took a massive hit. Her name was dragged through the mud in professional circles, and her social life, which she had worked so hard to cultivate, evaporated overnight. Invitations stopped coming, and the friends who once fawned over her at dinner parties suddenly had other commitments. Robert was furious, not just about the job loss, but about how it affected him. Without my mom's income, their lavish lifestyle started to crack. Credit card bills piled up, and the expensive dinners became takeout meals. Eventually, Robert packed up and left, muttering something about how he couldn't be with someone who ruined him financially. Sophia, predictably, was nowhere to be found. Once she realized the money had dried up, she conveniently transferred to an out-of-state school, no doubt looking for her next source of easy funding. And my mother? She was left with nothing. For weeks, she avoided me, skulking around the house like a ghost, avoiding eye contact and refusing to acknowledge what she had done. Until one afternoon, when she finally knocked on my bedroom door. "Olivia," she said, her voice small, hesitant. "Can we talk?" I sat on my bed, arms crossed. "Talk about what, Mom? How you stole my future? Or how you let Robert walk all over us?" She sighed, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "I was just trying to do what was best for everyone. I thought Sophia needed it more. She was struggling." I stared at her in disbelief. "And I wasn't? Do you even realize what you did to me?" My voice cracked, but I pushed through. "I worked so hard, and you threw it all away for her." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't think it through. I just wanted to keep this family together." I let out a bitter laugh. "Family? What family? Robert left. Sophia left. And now you're sitting here acting like a victim." She wiped her tears and whispered, I don't know how to fix this." For the first time in a long time, I felt nothing but exhaustion. "You can't fix it, Mom. What's done is done." There was a long silence before she spoke again. "I know I don't deserve it, but I need your help, Olivia. I can't find another job. My reputation is ruined." I looked at her, taking in the once proud woman who had always been so obsessed with keeping up appearances. Now she was just a broken shell of herself, and I could have been cruel, could have thrown everything she had done right back in her face. But I didn't. "I'll help," I said finally, my voice calm but firm. "But not for free. You're going to pay me back every single dollar." Her eyes widened. I don't have—" "Figure it out," I interrupted. "Get a job. Sell something. I don't care how, but I want my money back." She nodded slowly, as if finally understanding that things would never be the same between us again. In the weeks that followed, I moved out of the house and into a small apartment near campus. Thanks to a combination of scholarships, part-time work, and a little help from my dad's old friends, I managed to enroll in school without a dime from my mother. It wasn't easy, but it felt good knowing that I was rebuilding my life on my own terms. And my mother? She got a job at a local retail store, far from the prestigious nonprofit world she once ruled. Every month, a small deposit showed up in my account, her way of repaying me, one paycheck at a time. We weren't close anymore, and I wasn't sure we ever would be. But for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from her control, free from the weight of her expectations, and most importantly, free to build the future I deserved. 3 years later, I stood in my white coat, gazing at my reflection in the mirror of my small apartment. Medical school wasn't easy, but I had made it without my mother's stolen money, without Robert's empty promises, and without Sophia's privilege. Mom still sent her monthly payments, though our relationship remained distant. We exchanged occasional texts, polite but devoid of warmth. She had learned the hard way that trust, once broken, wasn't easily repaired. One day, I received an unexpected email from her. "I'm proud of you." It was short, simple, and probably the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get. I stared at it for a moment before closing my laptop with a sigh. I didn't need her validation anymore. I had built my own success, and that was enough. As I stepped out the door, ready to face another long shift, I smiled to myself. I had won in the end.